The thermometer on Sergeant First Class Derek Paulson's wrist read 47 degrees Celsius. He stopped trusting it at 44. The desert floor shimmered like the surface of something alive, a membrane stretched too tight, about to split. No cloud, no shadow. The sun sat directly overhead and offered nothing. Not even the mercy of an angle, just vertical white heat driving straight into the skull. Paulson, water check. Lieutenant Cole Whitaker's voice came from 3 meters ahead, clipped, flat, not a question. An order wrapped in a question's clothes. 2 liters, 14 minutes of filter capacity. Paulson kept his eyes moving. Left, right, the ridge, the channel between the rocks. Hargrove's down to 1.4, he drinks last. Private First Class Danny Hargrove, 22 years old, didn't argue. He hadn't said much since they'd crossed the dry riverbed. None of them had. Talking cost moisture was the only currency that mattered out here. The mission brief had called this sector administratively inactive. No recent hostile contact. Low probability of organized resistance. The analyst who wrote those words was sitting in a temperature-controlled room in Bagram, and Paulson wanted very badly to put him in this valley for approximately 45 seconds. 6 men, 2 kilometers from the target compound. No satellite link for the past 4 hours. The relay satellite had drifted, or been jammed, or something else. Command wasn't explaining. The radio worked on short-range tactical frequencies. That was all. Corporal James Fenwick was on point, moving along the rock line with the particular silence of a man who had learned to walk the way water flows. He paused, raised a fist. Everyone froze. Paulson dropped to a knee behind a boulder that radiated heat like a stove plate. He pressed his back against it and felt his uniform shirt begin to smoke with sweat immediately. His rifle came up to his shoulder with the automatic grace of 9 years of muscle memory. Nothing moved. Then Fenwick lowered his fist slowly. He turned back with 2 fingers pointed at his eyes, then swept them toward the northern ridgeline. Observation post. Paulson didn't see it immediately. The heat shimmer made everything waver. The rock face looked like it was breathing. But then he caught it. A slight displacement, the angular shadow that didn't belong to anything organic, the shape of a scope housing. If you knew what to look for. He keyed his radio. Whitaker, we've got eyes on the ridge. Northern slope. 200 meters. A pause. The static buzz with heat. Copy, Whitaker said. How many? 1 visible. Assume support. Another pause. Whitaker was looking at the map. They all knew what it meant. The ridge wrapped around the valley's northern face and angled southeast. It gave perfect coverage of their extraction route and their current position both. If that observer was calling in coordinates, they were already boxed. We continue, Whitaker said. Double time. Paulson exchanged a look with Hargrove. The kid's face was a mask of controlled fear, eyes bright, jaw set, the look of someone performing calm instead of feeling it. Stay close, Paulson told him quietly. They moved. The heat pressed down on them like a physical weight. Paulson's boots found each footfall through the stones and gravel with mechanical efficiency. But his mind was running ahead, tracing the sight lines, calculating the exposure windows, identifying the ground between him and the ridge where a man could disappear. There wasn't much of it. The valley floor was open. Designed, it felt like, for exactly this purpose. At the channel between 2 rock formations barely wide enough to fit 2 men abreast, Fenwick froze again. This time the gesture was different. 1 flat hand, palm down, pressed toward the earth. Get down. Now. Paulson was already moving. He hit the gravel hard and rolled behind a low shelf of stone, Hargrove coming in a half-second behind him. On his right, Specialist Marcus Webb flattened against the channel wall. Across the gap, Fenwick was gone. He'd simply ceased to exist above the rock line. 3 seconds of silence, then the first shot. It came from the high ground to the east. The distinctive crack of a Dragunov, a sound Paulson had heard enough times that his body recognized it before his brain finished processing. The round sparked off the rock face 2 meters above Hargrove's position. Not a miss. A ranging shot. Contact east. The second shot cut across Paulson's transmission. This one was closer. Close enough that he felt the pressure wave of displaced air across his left ear. A sensation like being slapped with an open hand. RPG. RPG north. The explosion came from the far side of the channel. Webb's voice cut out. Paulson heard the scream of shrapnel against rock, and then the secondary wave of silence that always followed detonations in enclosed terrain. A ringing, pressurized nothing. Webb? Whitaker's voice. Hard. Urgent. I'm up. I'm up. Webb's answer came ragged but immediate. Paulson pressed himself flat and made a count. 6 men had entered this channel. He could account for Whitaker at the southern entrance, Fenwick somewhere ahead in the shadows, Hargrove 2 feet to his left, Webb across the gap, and where's Cartwright? Nobody answered. The shooting intensified. 3 rifles now, triangulated east ridge, north slope, and somewhere in the rocks directly above the channel entrance. They had the elevation. They had the angles. They had been waiting. Paulson understood now with cold certainty, for exactly this formation of men in exactly this piece of ground. This wasn't a patrol running into a contact. This was an ambush that had been prepared for them specifically. Whitaker. Paulson's voice stayed level by will alone. We are in a prepared kill zone. confirm. A beat, then, confirm. Nobody said what came next. The question of who had prepared it and how they'd known was a question for later. If there was a later. Can't hold here, Paulson continued. We break north. We're exposed to the ridge. We break south. We're back in the open valley. East is the contact origin. West is a cliff face. Fenwick called from the shadows ahead. West is a cliff face, Paulson agreed. The rifle fire picked up another frequency. A different weapon, heavier, not aimed at the channel, but at the ridge to the north. As if, Paulson stopped thinking. He listened, because something wasn't right about the geometry of what he was hearing. The sniper on the east ridge was good. Paulson had been under fire from professionals before. You could feel the difference, the patience between shots, the way the rounds came in just ahead of your movement rather than behind it, the sense that whoever was behind the scope had already calculated where you were going to be. This shooter had that quality. The rounds weren't harassing fire. They were a net, cast precisely, drawing tighter with each shot. Hargrove pressed against the rock beside Paulson. The boy's breathing was controlled, ragged around the edges, but controlled. He was holding. On my mark, Paulson said, we're going to move to the next formation. 30 feet. I'll go first. You follow in 3 seconds. You do not stop moving. You do not look at the ridge. You focus on the rocks ahead and you move. Understood? Yes, Sergeant. Good. Paulson drew in one long breath. Mark. He came up from behind cover and ran. The gravel shifted under his boots and the heat slammed into him from every direction at once above, below, reflecting off every stone surface. The east ridge seemed to lean toward him. He felt exposed in a way that went beyond tactical calculation, a primal nakedness. 20 feet, 15, 10. He went down behind the next formation and rolled and came up with his rifle already oriented toward the ridge. 3 seconds passed. Hargrove came in behind him, breathing hard. Up. Good. Paulson scanned the ridge line through his optic. Now the shot came from nowhere, not from the east. Not from the north slope. From a direction that the canyon's geometry should have made impossible, far to the northwest. Above the cliff face Fenwick had written off, a distance Paulson couldn't immediately calculate. The sniper on the east ridge, the one who had been methodically working his angles, dropped. Not fell, dropped. The specific collapse of a man whose nervous system received its termination signal between one instant and the next. No reaction, no stagger. Presence, then absence. Webb's voice on the radio. What was? Stay down. Whitaker cut him off. Paulson looked northwest. The cliff face rose in terraced broken rock, no smooth surfaces, no obvious shooting platform. The kind of terrain that sniper doctrine said was unusable above 700 meters because of wind shear off the rock angles and the thermal layering over desert terrain. You couldn't get a stable shot from up there. Not in this heat. Not at this hour. The math said it was impossible. The math was wrong. 2 seconds later, the RPG position to the north took a second round, not a headshot this time, but a precision hit to the weapon itself. The distinct sound of a rocket launcher being destroyed rather than the man holding it. Whitaker, Paulson said carefully. Are we getting fire support? Negative. No support available. Satellite link is still down. Then someone is shooting for us. The radio crackled. Not their frequency, a frequency adjacent to theirs, bleeding through the static with the particular characteristics of a transmitter that wasn't trying to be found. A faint signal. Not voice. Morse. Old. Paulson's hands moved almost before his brain engaged. Dash. He had learned Morse as a young private because an old NCO had told him the old ways don't fail when the new ways do. He hadn't used it in 6 years. He read the sequence twice to make sure. Move west. Now. Cliff base. Move. Fenwick materialized from the shadows. Did you just read that? I read it. The cliff face is. I know what the cliff face is. Paulson was already moving. Either we trust it or we stay here. Vote fast. Nobody voted to stay. 300 miles to the southwest. In a command center that smelled of recycled air and institutional coffee, Captain Nathan Holloway heard the shot signature analysis come through on his terminal and felt the temperature of the room change. Nobody turned down the air conditioning. Nobody opened a window, but everyone at the terminals around him went fractionally still, the particular stillness of people who had just read something they were not prepared to read. Holloway looked at the analysis. He looked at it again. The algorithm was straightforward. Acoustic pattern, ballistic trajectory calculation, compensated for thermal layering and wind shear, cross-referenced against recorded shooter signatures in the system database. Match confidence, 97.4%. Signature ID, redacted. Note, this record was administratively closed, date redacted. Holloway pushed back from his terminal and walked to the door of the senior watch officer's office without knocking. Colonel Raymond Bridges was on a video call. Holloway walked in anyway and set the printout on the desk in front of him. Bridges looked at it. His face did something complicated. He said, into his phone, I'll call you back. He put the phone down. He read the printout again. He turned it face down on the desk. Captain Holloway, Sir, this analysis is under review. Consider it preliminary. Sir, the team in the field is in contact. They've lost. I'm aware of their status. If this signature is authentic, then there is an asset in their vicinity who could... Holloway. Bridges' voice hadn't risen. It had gotten quieter, which was much worse. Stand down. This analysis is preliminary and under review. You do not communicate this information to the field team. You do not record this conversation. You sit back down at your terminal and you perform your watch duties. Are we clear? Holloway looked at the printout, face down on the desk. He looked at the colonel. Clear, sir, he said. He walked back to his terminal. He sat down. He performed his watch duties. The terminal in front of him displayed the tactical picture for Sector 7, with the clean indifference of a system that processed all outcomes as equivalent: team in contact, team not in contact, team returned, team did not return, all rendered in the same crisp font at the same resolution. The system had no preference. Holloway did. He had joined this job because he believed, in the way that young people believe things before the evidence accumulates, that the structures he worked within were oriented toward the protection of the people inside them, that the chain of command existed as infrastructure for that protection, that Colonel Bridges, who had a chest full of ribbons and the bearing of a man who had earned serious things, was in the business of keeping soldiers alive. He had revised that belief slowly, over 4 years, one anomaly at a time. The anomalies were never large. That was the thing. Large anomalies got noticed. These were small, a mission brief that didn't quite account for known hostile presence, a satellite window that closed earlier than scheduled, a QRF that was repositioned 40 minutes before a contact. Each one explicable, each one defensibly. The pattern only visible if you were watching for it, and you only watched for it if something had already made you suspicious. Holloway had become suspicious 18 months ago. A team in a different sector, a silence that looked a great deal like this one, and an after-action report that described the absence of support in language so carefully neutral it read like a legal document. He kept his mouth shut. He didn't have enough. He didn't have anything except pattern recognition and the growing certainty that pattern recognition alone would not protect him if he brought it to the wrong person. But he kept his radio tuned to the frequency bleeding through the static, and when Paulson's team moved west and the shooting on the north slope stopped with surgical precision, Holloway opened a classified record on his second screen, not to read it, just to look at the header before it disappeared behind his access clearance wall, and he thought about the word that the old-timers used when they didn't want to say a name out loud: ghost. Her name, when she had one, was Sergeant First Class Elaine Voss. The record said otherwise now. The record said administrative separation, circumstances undisclosed. The records had been cleaned the way you clean a crime scene, not erased, but reorganized. The incriminating details moved somewhere only certain people could access. She had come up through a program that didn't officially exist, trained by instructors whose names were also redacted from certain documents, and she had reached a level of precision with a long rifle that the Army's own testing infrastructure couldn't fully account for. Not because the testing was inadequate, because some part of what she did existed in a space beyond instrumentation. She didn't use technology the way the newer operators did. No laser rangefinders during the shot itself. She calculated barometric pressure, humidity, the density altitude, the Coriolis effect at the specific latitude, the thermal layering she could read by watching how dust moved a quarter mile away. She built the shot in her head before she ever touched the trigger. The rifle was the last step in a process that was mostly mathematics and patience. She had set records that were classified because releasing them would have raised uncomfortable questions about what human precision was capable of. Her instructors had written assessments that used words like anomalous and outside the standard distribution. One senior instructor, a man named Kowalczyk, who had spent 30 years in the business and was not given to overstatement, had written in her final evaluation, "I do not have a framework adequate to assess this operator. Recommend approval and assignment. Do not overmanage." The Army had overmanaged. They had attached her to units that didn't quite know what they had. They had sent her on missions designed for conventional sniper support, which was like using a surgical instrument to dig a trench. She'd done the work. She'd done it without complaint, but the people who understood what she actually was, not what she could do in the narrow sense, but what she represented as a kind of human capability, those people were few, and most of them were outside the decision-making chain. She had come to the attention of Colonel Bridges 3 years into her career, when he'd reviewed an after-action report from a mission in Helmand that contained a shot distance that he'd initially assumed was a transcription error. He'd requested the original field documentation. He'd sat with it for 48 hours. Then he'd had her transferred to his unit. For 2 years, it had been, by most measures, a productive arrangement. She was given missions that matched her capability. She was given support that was not adequate. Nothing was ever fully adequate in the theater, but better than what she'd had. She began to understand the operational picture in ways that went beyond her individual assignments. The way that a person who is trusted with real information eventually builds a real picture. That was, she would later understand, the mistake. She had begun to see how the picture was shaped, not just what was in it. Then came the operation in the Korengal. 4 operators sent in. Support promised. Support withdrawn at the last hour, a decision made at levels above Colonel Bridges. Though Bridges had been the man who delivered the news to the forward element via radio silence, they simply stopped responding. Voss had held her position for 11 hours, providing overwatch for a team that command had quietly decided to expend. She had known what was happening by hour 3, not suspected known. The pattern of non-response had a texture she recognized. She had heard it once before, in a different context, when a mission had gone over budget politically, and the decision had been made above everyone's heads to let the outcome be whatever it was. You could feel it in the radio silence. Not technical failure, deliberate absence, the weight of a decision already made. She had kept shooting anyway, not because it would change the outcome. She could do the arithmetic as well as anyone. 3 against 11, in prepared positions, with the support element gone dark. The arithmetic was settled, but there were 3 men below her who were still moving, still fighting, and the thing she had learned from a decade with a rifle was that the last shot mattered as much as the first. Maybe more, because the last shot was the one you fired when the math had already told you to stop. 2 of the 3 operators died in the final push. The third, a young sergeant named Pearson, who she had never met and never would made it to a dry channel and hid there for 6 hours until a patrol from a different unit found him by accident. He had frostbite on 3 fingers and a shrapnel wound across his back, and he gave a debrief that was classified within 48 hours. Voss held her position until the firing stopped. Then she moved 6 kilometers through contested terrain. She moved at night and went to ground during the day. She crossed 2 ridgelines that her training said were impassable and found, as she had always found, that training was a description of the average, and she was not the average. She ate nothing for 31 hours. She drank collected condensation and the bitterness of dried riverbed clay when the condensation wasn't enough. On the 3rd day, she reached a position she had identified during her pre-mission planning as a contingency, a waypoint she'd marked as if everything fails. She had never expected to use it. She sat in the shelter of a rock overhang and thought for a very long time about what to do next. Going back meant reporting. Reporting meant entering a system controlled by the people who had just made a decision about what her teammates' lives were worth. The system would process her. It would produce an outcome determined by the people at its top. She thought about Kowalczyk's assessment. Do not overmanage. She thought about the pattern of decisions she had been assembling, piece by piece, over 3 years of seeing more than she was meant to see. She thought about what the documentation would be worth if it were ever assembled in one place and given to someone who couldn't be silenced. She did not go back. 3 of the 4 operators didn't make it out. Voss did. Nobody knew how. There were reports unverified, filed by a journalist who had been in the region and later retracted the story under circumstances that were also undisclosed, of a single figure moving through 6 kilometers of contested terrain in the night, alone, carrying a rifle that should have been too heavy for the pace she was moving. When she didn't report to the forward operating base, they listed her missing. When the days became weeks, they listed her dead. When someone with sufficient clearance asked why her records were being administratively closed rather than transferred to casualty affairs, the answer came back from 2 levels above. Operational security, do not pursue. Her equipment was collected from her position. Her locker was cleared. Her name was removed from the unit roster. The old-timers, the ones who had known her, trained with her, watched her put rounds through targets at distances that made the instructors go quiet. They didn't say her name in any official context. But sometimes, when a shot came in from an angle that made no tactical sense, from a range that should have been impossible, from a position that didn't exist on any map, they'd look at each other, and one of them would say, very quietly, "Ghost." Paulson reached the cliff base and found nothing. No person, no equipment, no sign of occupation, and he was looking for signs, actively, with the practiced eye of a man who had spent years reading ground for exactly this kind of evidence. The rock at the base was undisturbed. The dust was undisturbed. Whatever had been here, if anything had been here, had left no mark. But the ridge to the north was quiet. The east ridge was quiet. And the radio static continued to breathe on that adjacent frequency with a regularity that felt deliberate. "She's still up there," Fenwick said. He was looking at the cliff face above them, shading his eyes against the sun. "Has to be. Nobody moves that fast from a shooting position." "You don't know it's a she," Webb said. "That signature was hers," Fenwick said. "I was in the Korengal when she disappeared. I know the signature." Nobody argued. Hargrove was sitting with his back against the cliff base, drinking water with the disciplined sips of a man rationing. His color was bad. The heat had been at him. Paulson knelt beside him. "How are you doing?" "I'm operational," Hargrove said. "That's not what I asked." A pause. "I'm scared," the kid said. Just flat, factual. No performance of bravery around it. "Good," Paulson told him. "Fear means you're processing correctly. Stupid men aren't scared. They're the ones who die first." He stood up. "Stay hydrated. Stay low." Through the rest of the afternoon, and the desert afternoon was a different beast entirely from the morning. The heat somehow less intense but more insidious, lying over the terrain like a fever rather than a blow. The presence above them made itself known only through its effects. At 1,347, a sniper attempting to reoccupy the east ridge took a round before he reached his position. They heard the shot. They did not see where it came from. At 1,000, 412. A vehicle that had been maneuvering on the valley floor to the south trying to cut their extraction route took a round through its engine block from a direction that triangulated, improbably, to a rock formation, 300 meters north of where any of them could see a viable shooting lane. At 1,431, the Morse signal returned. East channel clear. Move in 15. Paulson looked at Whitaker. Whitaker's jaw was set in the expression of a man making a calculation that he didn't entirely like. "We trust this," Paulson said. It wasn't a question. "We don't have a choice," Whitaker said. "Command is still silent. No satellite, no CAS, no QRF. Whatever is up on that cliff is the only support we have." A pause. Move in 12. Paulson keyed his tactical radio. "Command channel. Bravo 6. This is Bravo 2-1. Sitrep. Over. Static. Bravo 6. We are in contact. Requesting immediate support. Over. Static. But not uniform static. He could hear the underlying frequency modulation that meant the channel was open, monitored, receiving. Someone was listening, and choosing not to respond. He released the transmit button. He thought about that. He thought about it for a long time. Holloway's relief arrived at 1,600 local time. Sergeant Patricia Desmond Sharp, young, unhappy that her rotation was covering a shift that had gone long, slid into the seat beside him and pulled up the current status board. "Anything? Team in contact in Sector 7. They've been in and out of communication for the past—" "I see it." Desmond scanned the board. "Satellite link is still down?" "Still down." "Any support assets?" "Nothing in range." Holloway paused. "There may be an independent asset in the vicinity. Unknown affiliation." Desmond looked at him. "Unknown affiliation, meaning what exactly?" "Meaning, Command has declined to identify the asset or acknowledge its presence." "Command's been silent on this team the whole time?" "The whole time." Desmond was quiet for a moment. She was reading between the lines in the way that intelligent people do when they're given incomplete information and realize the incompleteness is deliberate. "Is there a reason," she said carefully, "that Command would want that team to not come back?" Holloway looked at his terminal. "I think that's a question above my clearance level." "Is it above mine?" "It's above everyone's in this room." He gathered his papers. "I'm going to get coffee. When I come back, I want to see that team's radio status updated." He walked out of the room. He walked down the corridor to the bathroom. He sat in a stall for 45 seconds and pulled out his personal phone strictly against protocol and sent a message to a number he had memorized and never stored, a number that belonged to a journalist he had met at a conference in D.C. 3 years ago and had kept as what he privately thought of as emergency infrastructure. Sector 7, Bravo 2-1. Look at the administrative records for a unit action in Korengal 9 years ago. They're going to close this out quiet. Don't let them." He deleted the message. He washed his hands. He went back to his terminal. The tactical situation changed at 1,500. The enemy commander, whoever was coordinating the forces in the valley, was good. Paulson could tell by the way the pressure shifted. It stopped being about pinning the team in place. It became about triangulation. The shots that came in now weren't aimed at the team. They were aimed at the cliff face above them. Probing shots. Searching shots. Looking for the origin point. They had understood that the shots killing their men were coming from above. They were trying to find it. The cliff face above Paulson went quiet. Not empty, he would have bet his life that it wasn't empty, but quiet. No more Morse. No more shots. The shooter had gone to ground, which meant the shooter was being hunted. "She knows," Fenwick said quietly. "She knows," Paulson agreed. "If they find her," Webb started. "They won't," Fenwick said. But his voice carried the particular uncertainty of a man making a statement he needs to believe rather than one he knows to be true. The probing fire intensified. 3 shooters now working the rock face systematically, moving their impact points in a grid pattern. Professional, patient, they were going to find the position eventually through sheer arithmetic. Hargrove's voice, low. "We have to do something. We're not in a position to provide overwatch at that elevation," Whitaker said. "We don't have to provide overwatch. We have to create a distraction." Hargrove looked at Paulson, something that makes them shift the fire off the cliff face. "Buy her time to reposition." Paulson looked at Whitaker. Whitaker looked at the terrain. "The vehicle that got hit on the valley floor," Whitaker said slowly. "It's still there, burning. Wind is pushing the smoke north. If something came out of that smoke," Paulson began. "Something that looked like it was trying to move," Webb continued. "A decoy," Paulson finished. "It took 4 minutes to set up." Webb stripped his outer uniform layer and packed it with rocks to approximate a figure silhouette. Fenwick rigged it to a length of 550 cord that ran through a gap in the rock formation and emerged 40 meters south, where Webb could control it from cover. A crude theater piece, the kind of improvisation that had a roughly even chance of working and a roughly even chance of making things significantly worse. "On your mark," Fenwick said. Whitaker looked at the cliff face. Somewhere up there, the probing fire was still working its way across the rock. "Mark," he said. The figure emerged from the smoke at the edge of the burning vehicle. Webb walked it forward with the cord not smoothly, the way a person would actually move. but with the particular irregular rhythm of someone trying to move without being seen, crouching, pausing, crouching again. Immediate response from the 3 rifle positions. All of them shifted south. The cliff face went silent. 30 seconds passed. 40. A minute. The decoy took 3 rounds and dissolved into its component rocks and nylon, and the shooters began to recalibrate, but the Morse signal returned. Move now. All of you. East Channel. Do not wait. Now, Paulson said. Everyone. Now. They moved through the East Channel at a run, and it was clear in the way that the previous passage through it had not been clear in the way that a room is clear after someone has methodically gone through it before you. 2 positions that should have held riflemen were empty. A 3rd position had been occupied recently. Paulson could see the impression in the dust, the disturbed pebbles, but whatever had been there was gone. She had been working while they set up the decoy. She had used the time they bought her to eliminate the grid search. At the channel's far end, the terrain opened into broken ground that led toward the extraction route. 2 kilometers, still open, still exposed, but the ridge that had been the primary threat was empty now. Whatever organized resistance had been in this valley had been systematically taken apart over the past 3 hours by a single person in a position that shouldn't have been viable. Whitaker called a security halt behind a rock formation. Rally, water check, casualty report. Everyone was up. Hargrove was pale and shaking slightly from the heat and exertion, but functional. Webb had a cut on his forearm from the shrapnel earlier, not serious, already clotting. Cartwright, who Paulson had lost track of in the initial contact, materialized from behind a rock formation to the east. Where the hell have you been? Paulson demanded. I went forward, Cartwright said, slightly defensive. During the initial contact, I got separated. Going forward, Paulson said, with the particular precision of a man controlling his voice with great effort, is not what you do when you lose comms with your element. I know, Sergeant. We will discuss this at length later. Are you injured? Negative. Then get water and get ready to move. Paulson turned away. The radio crackled, not command, the adjacent frequency. 2, 1. This is Ghost. A woman's voice. Hoarse, not from emotion, from disuse. The voice of someone who had not spoken aloud in a very long time and was relearning the mechanics of it. Flat. Controlled. Every word measured and placed. Confirm your status. Paulson keyed the radio. Ghost, 2-1. 6 personnel. 1 minor casualty, capable of movement. Who are you? A pause. 3 seconds. 4. Move northeast 200 meters. There's a wadi. Shallow, wide enough. Rest there until 1800. A pause. Don't call me anything. Negative. We need. Your extraction route is compromised. The voice was still flat, but it carried something underneath. Not urgency. Certainty. The certainty of someone who has already done the calculation and is offering the answer. Someone gave your route to the people who set up this contact. Not up the chain. Down the chain. Someone with access to mission-level planning and no interest in you coming back. A pause that felt different from the others waited. The wadi. 1,800. I'll have more. The transmission cut. Paulson looked at Whitaker. Well, Whitaker said, yeah. Paulson agreed. At 1,800. In the wadi, she came down from the cliff. Paulson didn't see her approach. None of them did. He was watching the terrain to the north, her expected direction of origin, when Fenwick quietly said left, and he turned, and she was simply there, 15 meters away, emerging from a draw in the rock that his eyes had assessed and dismissed as too narrow. She was wrong in every expected way. Not tall, not imposing. A woman of perhaps 35 who looked 10 years older, with the kind of face that the desert makes when it works on a person long enough, skin tightened, dried, the color of the ground around her. She was wearing clothing that was neither military nor civilian, a layered system of earth-colored fabric that she'd clearly modified herself over time. The rifle across her back was a custom build, long-barreled, heavily modified, that Fenwick looked at with the expression of a weapons technician seeing a piece of work that was beyond anything in the current inventory. She stopped 5 meters from Paulson. She didn't sit down. She didn't set down the rifle. She had the stillness of someone who had learned that the cost of relaxing was measured in reaction time. Ghost, Paulson said. Don't, she said. Then what do I call you? Sergeant. A small thing, a fractional tightening around the eyes that might have been wry. It's been a while, but it's still accurate. You've been out here. This conversation isn't about me. She was looking at the terrain around them, not at him. Your mission brief. Who authorized it? Whitaker is the mission commander. Above that, what was the originating authorization? Whitaker stepped forward. Colonel Bridges, Sector 7 Command. She was quiet. You know that name, Paulson said. I know that name, she said. He's the one who gave the order to not respond on the command channel, Paulson said. It wasn't a question, it was an inference he'd been building all afternoon. He's been sitting silent while we were in contact. He did the same thing 9 years ago. She said it with no affect at all, no anger, no bitterness, none of the things Paulson would have expected from someone stating that they had been deliberately abandoned. Just fact, different valley, same protocol, radio silence, no support, wait for the team to not come back. She paused. It works, usually. Why? Hargrove asked from behind Paulson. She glanced at him, a quick assessment, the way you assess a person for threat or injury, then moved on. Your mission tonight was targeting a location that contains a piece of documentation, records of operations that were run over a period of 6 years. Operations that certain people in a certain chain of command cannot afford to have exist in any accessible format. She paused. I know because I was involved in 4 of those operations, and I have been collecting the rest of the documentation for approximately 7 years. The Wadi was quiet. You came back for that, Paulson said. I came back for that, she said. You people were incidental. A pause. I adjusted. Why? She looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were the color of washed flint gray, utterly without warmth, but not cold in the aggressive way. Cold in the way the desert was cold at night, a fact of the environment. Nothing personal. Because you're here, she said. And you're still fighting. And the people who sent you here to die are sitting in climate-controlled rooms waiting for your names to come across the casualty report. She looked away. I know what that feels like. From the other side, nobody said anything for a while. The documentation, Whitaker said finally. The compound is accessible, she said. Was always accessible. The mission wasn't about the compound. The mission was designed to get you close enough to the compound's security elements that the contact was unavoidable. Plausibly deniable casualties. She looked at the terrain map Whitaker had spread on his thigh. Here, she pointed to a position 400 meters north of the original target building. Secondary structure. Not on your brief, it's where the records actually are. I know because I put them there. You put them there, Paulson repeated. 7 years of collection, she said, required a final resting place. Something shifted in her face, not a smile, not anything that obvious. A settling, a thing reaching its intended position. I've been waiting for the right team to be sent in here. The right team meaning one that command was actively trying to eliminate. Plausible deniability works both ways. She stood up. Your retrieval of that documentation would be what's the word authorized. Because we were sent here, Whitaker said slowly. Because you were sent here, she agreed. To this sector, with access to this target area, by Colonel Raymond Bridges, who will now have signed the authorization for the team that retrieved the evidence that removes him from his position and exposes 6 years of sanctioned criminal activity. She paused. He did it himself. I just needed someone to be sent. Paulson looked at her for a long time. How long have you been planning this? She looked at him with that flint-colored stillness. How long have you been in the army? She said. They moved at 2,100, when the desert temperature dropped to merely brutal. She moved with them. Not ahead, not behind, alongside. In a way that made Paulson think of a satellite in parallel orbit, close enough to be present, far enough to maintain its own trajectory. The rifle was a constant presence across her back. She didn't handle it or check it or give it the nervous attention that Paulson had seen in less experienced soldiers. It was simply part of her geometry. The secondary structure was exactly where she'd said it would be, a low building, mostly underground, with a surface profile small enough that the satellite imagery had interpreted it as a natural rock formation. It had been in the mission area the entire time, not on any brief. They retrieved the storage drive and the printed files and the photographs in 40 minutes. Fenwick, who had some background in intelligence work, went pale reading the headers on the documents as Paulson held the flashlight. Webb didn't ask what was in them. Hargrove did, once. Paulson said, not here. The extraction route she had cleared earlier held. Whatever organized force had been operating in the valley had collapsed, partly because of the afternoon's attrition, partly because the command element they'd been reporting to had apparently gone silent around 1,730. Paulson didn't know why yet. Later, he would learn that a journalist in Kabul had begun asking questions about a redacted unit action in the Korangal, and that someone very senior had spent the past 2 hours making calls that left no time for operational oversight. The footprint of a man trying to contain a leak looks, from the outside, identical to an organization abandoning its field elements. At the extraction point of flat ground 2 kilometers from the wadi, she stopped. Paulson stopped with her. You're not coming with us, he said. No. The documentation will need a witness. Someone who can. You have the files, she said. You have Fenwick, who read them. You have 6 men who were sent into a prepared kill zone and survived. She paused. You have enough. What will you do? She looked out across the dark desert. The stars over the desert at night were different from anywhere else. He'd been hard and close and very numerous, the way cold things are numerous. She looked at them for a moment. What I've been doing, she said. 9 years is a long time to carry this alone. It is, she agreed. She didn't elaborate. Paulson looked at the terrain behind them. At the cliff face, invisible in the dark, where she had spent the afternoon doing something that the laws of physics were technically uncomfortable with. At the empty ground where men had been positioned and were no longer. At the valley that had been a killbox this morning and was now just a desert valley. I should know your name, he said. Your real name. A pause. Very long. The kind of pause that has weight. No, she said. You shouldn't. She shifted the rifle on her back. Move now. Your window closes in 40 minutes. If this works, if command changes, if there's accountability, then it works, she said. Move. He moved. At 30 meters he stopped and turned back. She was gone. The ground where she had been standing was empty. No direction of movement, no sound, nothing. As if the desert had opened briefly, allowed her passage, and closed again. He stood there for a moment. Then, he heard Whitaker's voice ahead. "Paulson, we're on the clock." He turned and walked toward the sound of his team. 3 weeks after the retrieval, during the initial debrief that would eventually become a classified inquiry, a JAG officer asked Sergeant First Class Derek Paulson to describe in detail the nature of the support his team had received from the unidentified asset in Sector 7. Paulson described the Morse signals, the accuracy and timing of the shots, the movement through terrain that should have been impassable, the information about the secondary structure, the documentation. The JAG officer asked, "Can you identify the asset?" Paulson said, "No." "Did the asset identify themselves during your interaction?" "Not to any standard." "Did the asset make any statements that might assist in identification?" Paulson thought about the wadi, about flint gray eyes, and a voice that had learned how to speak again after forgetting it had any reason to. About the rifle that Fenwick had looked at with the expression of someone seeing a piece of work that exceeded the available vocabulary. "No," he said. The JAG officer wrote something down. Later, much later, after Colonel Bridges had been removed from his position, and the inquiry had expanded in ways that made several people in several buildings very uncomfortable, Paulson sat in the barracks and tried to write down everything he remembered about the encounter. Not for the record. For himself, he remembered very little he could put into words. He remembered the quality of the silence that followed a shot at extreme range, the way the valley went still after each one, as if the desert itself was surprised. He remembered standing at the extraction point and watching a woman become part of the ground before he could complete a sentence. He remembered what she had said to Hargrove, who had asked her, near the end, why she had stayed. Why she had spent 9 years in the desert waiting for an opportunity instead of leaving, disappearing, going somewhere that wasn't a war zone. She had looked at the kid for a moment. She had considered something. She had said, "Don't trust the people who tell you they're protecting you. Trust the people who are standing beside you when they don't have to be." Hargrove had sat with that for a moment. Then he'd said, "Is that what you're doing right now?" She hadn't answered. She'd gone back to watching the terrain. Paulson closed his notebook. Outside, the desert night was indifferent. Stars over the FOB were fewer than they'd been in the valley. Light pollution, smoke, the accumulated haze of human activity. But they were still there, hard and cold and very numerous. He sat for a while. He thought about a woman in a landscape that had spent 9 years trying to kill her, reading the thermal layers in the air above a rifle barrel, choosing her moments with patience that was beyond the scope of anything he had a word for. He thought about Fenwick, who had gone very quiet during the debrief and hadn't said much since. Fenwick had known her, or known of her, in the way that people who work in close proximity to legend come to know the shape of a thing without ever seeing it directly. He had confirmed the shot signature. He had read the documents in the secondary structure with shaking hands, not from fear, Paulson had thought, but from the particular shock of having a suspicion confirmed at a scale you had not been prepared for. He thought about Hargrove, who had asked the question none of the others had thought to ask, or had thought to ask and decided not to. Why did you stay? Not why did you come back, which was the obvious question, the strategic question, the one with the useful answer about documentation and evidence and the long patience of a plan built over 9 years. But why did you stay? And she had answered it. Not fully. Not in a way that resolved everything, but she had answered it with the honesty of someone who had been alone long enough to have stopped performing honesty and started simply practicing it. Don't trust the people who tell you they're protecting you. Trust the people who are standing beside you when they don't have to be. He thought about what it took to stand beside people you had no obligation to, in a valley that was designed to kill you, for reasons that were yours and not theirs. What 9 years of accumulated silence and patience and precision had built, not as a weapon, it had always been a weapon, but as a position. A place to stand from which a certain kind of action became possible. He thought about what you become when the institution that trained you decides you are more useful as an absence than as a presence. Whether you can hold on to the thing you were, the specific quality of care that had made you accurate in the first place, when the structure that organized that care has been burned away. He thought she had. He turned off the light. He didn't write anything else. Somewhere in a desert that has no mercy for the unprepared and no preference for the just, a woman moves through terrain that is not on any map, carrying documentation that certain powerful people have spent years pretending does not exist, waiting for the next team that someone sends into a place they're not supposed to come back from. The rifle is still accurate. The patience is still intact. The name is still gone.